When looking at the ways that digital literacy presents itself in the modern day era, it's important to understand how technology has progressed over time and has presented itself in the digital literacy landscape. In 2007, Apple released its first model of the iPhone, which allowed for a great acceleration in the ability for people to consistently communicate with each other, share ideas, and just really just connect on a greater scale than they were previously able to, even with the original invention of the internet. And I think that it's really important to note that within this invention of the iPhone, it just allowed for a greater widespread and more consistent usage of technology for human connection and human collaboration. And so, a year after the iPhone was released by Apple, Mark Bauerlein published his work called The Dumbest Generation in 2008, which discussed the ways that the younger generation at the time had really started to kind of experience like connection and information transitions in a different way with the use and the rise of digital media as it was kind of transitioning into a wider kind of idea. And so the main idea that he kind of talked about was that in their free time, instead of really doing things for like school or connecting with friends or doing anything really like unplugged, I guess, for lack of a better word, a lot of the younger generation was starting to use their free time solely to focus on technology, and their free time was taken up a lot of times by technology. So in The Dumbest Generation, he actually says that 31% of the students admitted to watching television or playing video games at least 6 hours per week. And so I think that this is a testament to how much time after school that students were focusing on technology, and this kind of shows the way that society was transitioning from a less unplugged kind of sector to more technology based. And I think what was really interesting was, apart from his report in 2008, was there was a study conducted in 2017 by Valerie Wee, which was titled Youth Audiences in the Media in the Digital Era. And it shared that the youth continue to spend significant amounts of time accessing and enjoying media. And so it increased from 6 hours to about 9 hours is what they found in this new study. So it showed that technology over the course of about 9 years continued to expand its influence and continued to kind of generate more of a prevalence in everyday teenagers' lives. So I think that's a really important thing to note, because it shows that since technology is something that is constantly rapidly expanding, it's interesting to see the ways in which, with the rapid expansion of technology as a medium, it also just kind of expanded the amount of time that teenagers and the younger generation as a whole were spending with their digital devices. So I think that that was really interesting as well. And then when you're looking at it from a problem stance, I think that it's notable to observe that people were using, as he stated in his 2008 piece, people were using technology not necessarily as a means of connecting with politics or nuanced ideas or sharing in or engaging in civil discourse. It was more so people were, or the younger generation, was more so focused on the entertainment aspects of technology. And so they were kind of utilizing it as a way to connect with other teenagers, but not really connecting with the world around them in a civil discourse kind of way. Like, if the connection was more so happening with like culture in like a pop culture-y kind of sense, or just connecting with like shared interests, but not necessarily connecting with impactful interests, if that makes sense. So I think one really interesting point was introduced by a man named Gustavo Mesh in 2009. He published something called The Internet and Youth Culture, and this talked about the ways that teenagers had kind of developed a bedroom culture, which was it consisted of teenagers developing more access to media, and then instead of making that something that they shared with people outside of their house, that became very like central to their individual experiences. So even though they were connecting with teenagers on the internet, they weren't really like connecting in person, and then the things that they were connecting through weren't really beneficial to society in a way that has been like allowed by like reading or things like that, which is like another point that Bauerlin had made, which I did think was really interesting. And so I think that when you're looking at what Bauerlin had said, he was correct in his diagnosis that like the younger generation had taken a turn from utilizing their free time, so they had a cognitive intellectual decline, and a rise in using it for like entertainment purposes. And so even though his work was published almost 2 decades ago, I think it does remain relevant because it talks about the way that the digital world has an impact on real world thought processes and the connections that stem from those. And I thought that the most interesting aspect of his piece was that his argument was that we need to return to print media, and like the reason that there was such a decline in cognitive things for the younger generation was a lack of reading and a lack of books, which I thought was really interesting, because I think that while he's correct in the notion that digital media has negatively affected like intellectual abilities, I think that like the solution needs to be more technology focused rather than reverting back in time to a more paper-based kind of solution, which is what he says in his piece. And so I think when we look back to the bedroom culture that I talked about previously, it kind of just shows that the younger generation kind of becomes contained to their devices and is less interactive with like the real world. And I think this also goes back into the thesis that it's more imperative to focus on a technology-based solution rather than reverting back into paper, just because like if you're going to go back in time to something that worked previously, like you're not keeping up with what kind of is technologically advancing along, and so that inability to keep up with something that is clearly like continuing to grow just kind of reverts everyone back, and so it's a pretty like unrealistic solution. So I thought that it was really interesting also to look at the ways that technology has been utilized previously in the classroom. So according to a survey that was conducted by the Technological Horizons in Education in 2009, it said that 26% of the students rated their teachers poor or fair on their ability to use technology in the classroom, which I thought was really interesting because it shows that there wasn't really a lot of emphasis on integrating technology with the schools, and so there was kind of a lot of discourse about technology impacting students negatively outside of the schools, but there was less collaboration within the schools working with technology. So I think that that kind of ties just back into the idea that in order to really bring back the intellectual ability for a lot of students, I think that it would be really helpful and honestly just imperative to take away a focus from needing the paper base and the reading large amounts of books and all this stuff as a means of bringing back intellectual abilities, but I think that it's just necessary to look at it from an angle of connecting it to the digital world. So instead of having a separate home digital field with the teenager experience with entertainment and other things like that, I think that it's imperative to be able to bring that into the classroom and just develop a sense of civil discourse, digital citizenship, which a lot of students expressed that they understood technology as a means of using it, but they in technical like aspects, but they didn't really understand the ability to use technology as a means of practicing digital citizenship. So I think that that really points back to the inability to use Bauerlin's solution of a paper base, because with such a rapidly expanding world and rapidly technologically advancing world, I think it's just necessary to focus and hone in on the ways that we can bring that into the classroom and really hone in on that, rather than making it kind of the bad guy for being outside of the classroom and focus on entertainment. I think that putting a lot more effort into demonstrating that in the classroom in a means of learning and a means of developing skills would be a lot more beneficial for students in the future as they navigate the new media landscape.